In the winter of 1834, 12 nuns at the Sacred Heart Convent in rural Ohio died within 48 hours of each other. Not one showed signs of illness, injury, or distress. The youngest was 23, the oldest 47. All were found in their beds, hands folded in prayer, expressions peaceful, as if they had simply chosen to slip away from this world. The local physician, Dr. Samuel Hartwell, examined each body and declared them all to be in perfect health at the time of death. No poison was found, no violence detected, no disease present. For nearly 2 centuries, the Catholic Church has kept the records of what really happened at Sacred Heart sealed away in their archives. But recently discovered letters and testimonies from that terrible winter reveal a truth far more disturbing than any supernatural explanation could ever be. Before we continue with the story of Sacred Heart Convent, this channel isn't for everyone, only for the bravest souls who dare to uncover the dark secrets that history tried to bury. If you have the courage to hear the truth about what really happened in that isolated convent, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what state or city you're listening from. Few channels dare to tell the stories we tell here. And if you've made it this far, you're clearly not like most people. Now let's discover together what drove 12 healthy women to their deaths in the span of 2 winter days. The events at Sacred Heart would remain hidden for generations, but the truth always has a way of surfacing, especially when it's written in the trembling hand of someone who lived through the horror. The Sacred Heart Convent sat on 47 acres of rolling farmland in southeastern Ohio, approximately 12 miles from the small town of Millbrook. Established in 1821 by the Sisters of Mercy, the convent had been built to serve the growing Catholic population of German and Irish immigrants who had settled in the region following the completion of the Ohio and Erie Canal. The 2-story brick building, with its distinctive bell tower and iron crosses, stood as a beacon of faith in a predominantly Protestant area where Catholic settlers often faced suspicion and sometimes open hostility. Mother Superior Catherine Brennan had overseen the convent since 1828, ruling with a firm but loving hand over the 17 nuns who called Sacred Heart home. The sisters supported themselves through farming, teaching at the small school they operated for local Catholic children, and needlework that they sold to families in Millbrook and the surrounding farms. By all accounts, they lived quietly, devoutly, and without causing any trouble for their Protestant neighbors. The winter of 1834 had been particularly harsh. Snow had fallen steadily since November, and by January, drifts reached nearly to the first-floor windows of the convent. The sisters had prepared well for the cold months, with their root cellar stocked with preserved vegetables, their pantry filled with grain, and their woodshed packed with split oak and maple. They had weathered difficult winters before, and this one seemed no different from the others. Sister Mary Agnes, 26 years old and originally from County Cork, Ireland, served as the convent's recorder, keeping detailed logs of daily activities, weather conditions, and the spiritual progress of the community. Her meticulous records, discovered in a sealed wooden box beneath the convent's floorboards during renovations in 1923, provide the only first-hand account of what transpired during those final days. Her handwriting, normally neat and precise, becomes increasingly erratic as the entries progress, with the final pages showing clear signs of distress, trembling letters, crossed-out words, and what appears to be tear stains on the paper. Among the sisters at Sacred Heart, several stood out for their particular devotion and unique roles within the community. Sister Mary Catherine, the youngest at 23, had joined the convent only 2 years earlier after her entire family died in a cholera outbreak in Cincinnati. She was known for her beautiful singing voice, which could be heard echoing through the halls during evening prayers. Sister Mary Elizabeth, at 34, served as the convent's herbalist and healer, having learned the medicinal properties of plants from her grandmother in Bavaria. Sister Mary Margaret, 41, was the convent's treasurer, and managed their modest finances with shrewd intelligence that had helped them survive the economic difficulties of the early 1830s. The convent followed the strict routine of canonical hours, with the sisters rising at 4 in the morning for matins and prime, followed by Mass at sunrise. They broke their fast with simple porridge and bread, then attended to their various duties. teaching, farming, cooking, cleaning, and prayer. Dinner was served at noon, followed by more work and study. Vespers took place at sunset, and Compline at 8 in the evening marked the beginning of the Great Silence that lasted until morning prayers. The building itself reflected the practical needs of a religious community. The first floor contained the chapel, refectory, kitchen, and Mother Superior's office. The second floor housed the dormitory-style cells where the sisters slept, each containing only a narrow bed, a small wooden crucifix, and a basin for washing. The basement held the root cellar, laundry area, and a small library where the sisters could study religious texts and conduct their correspondence. What made Sacred Heart unique among convents of its time was its isolation. The nearest neighbor lived 3 miles away, and the road to Millbrook became impassable during heavy snows. This isolation, which the sisters had always viewed as a blessing that allowed them to focus entirely on their spiritual duties, would prove to be a crucial factor in the tragedy that was about to unfold. The first sign that something was amiss came on the morning of January 15th, 1834. Sister Mary Agnes noted in her daily record that Sister Mary Catherine had not appeared for matins, an unprecedented occurrence for the young nun who was known for her punctuality and devotion. When Mother Superior Brennan went to check on her, she found Sister Mary Catherine lying peacefully in her bed, her rosary still clutched in her hands, her lips curved in what appeared to be a gentle smile. Dr. Samuel Hartwell, the Protestant physician from Millbrook, made the treacherous journey through the snowdrifts to examine the body. A man of science and skeptical of Catholic practices, Dr. Hartwell nonetheless took his oath seriously and conducted a thorough examination. His report, preserved in the Millbrook Township records, details his findings with clinical precision. The deceased shows no signs of violence, poisoning, or disease. Her complexion is healthy, her limbs show no rigidity beyond what is normal for recent death, and her eyes are clear. I can detect no cause of death through physical examination. What disturbed Dr. Hartwell most was not what he found, but what he didn't find. Sister Mary Catherine appeared to be in perfect health at the time of her death. Her heart was strong, her lungs clear, her blood showed no signs of illness. When he questioned the other sisters about her behavior in the days preceding her death, they could only say that she had seemed more peaceful than usual, spending extra time in prayer and speaking often of feeling blessed and chosen. The funeral was held 2 days later, on January 17th, with the entire convent community present. Father Timothy O'Brien, the circuit priest who visited Sacred Heart monthly, had been summoned from his parish in Lancaster to perform the last rites. The snow had continued to fall steadily, and the cemetery behind the convent was blanketed in white, with only the iron crosses marking the graves of previous sisters visible above the drifts. Sister Mary Agnes recorded that the funeral proceeded normally, with the sisters singing hymns and offering prayers for their departed sister's soul. But she also noted something that would prove to be prophetic. Several of the sisters commented on how peaceful Sister Mary Catherine looked, how she seemed to be smiling even in death. Sister Mary Elizabeth said she envied her the peace she had found. Sister Mary Margaret mentioned that she too had been having dreams of angels calling her home. The next morning, January 18th, Sister Mary Elizabeth did not appear for matins. Mother Superior Brennan, now deeply concerned, discovered the herbalist sister in her bed, lying in exactly the same position as Sister Mary Catherine had been found, hands folded, rosary clutched, that same inexplicable smile on her lips. The sight filled the Mother Superior with a dread she could not explain. This was no coincidence, no natural death. Something was terribly wrong at Sacred Heart Convent. Dr. Hartwell returned through the snow, his horse struggling against the drifts that had grown even deeper overnight. His second examination yielded the same impossible results. Sister Mary Elizabeth, like her predecessor, showed no signs of illness or injury. Her supplies of medicinal herbs were examined for potential poisons, but nothing was found. The doctor's notes from this visit show a growing frustration. I am baffled by these deaths. Both women appear to have simply stopped living, as if they had chosen to depart this world of their own volition. The remaining sisters gathered in the chapel that evening for an emergency prayer session. Mother Superior Brennan led them in reciting the rosary, But Sister Mary Agnes noted that the familiar words seemed to hang heavy in the air, as if the very atmosphere of the convent had changed. She wrote, "There is something in the air here, something that makes the hair on one's arms stand up. The other sisters feel it too, though none speak of it aloud. We pray harder, but our prayers seem to echo back to us unanswered." The deaths of Sisters Mary Catherine and Mary Elizabeth sent ripples of unease through the isolated convent community. Mother Superior Brennan imposed additional prayer sessions and fasting, believing that perhaps God was testing their faith. The remaining 15 sisters threw themselves into their devotions with renewed fervor, but Sister Mary Agnes noted a change in their behavior that chilled her to the bone. "The sisters speak more of death than of life," she wrote in her record book. "They discuss the peace that our departed sisters have found, and some express envy at their release from worldly suffering. Sister Mary Margaret has taken to spending hours staring out the window at the cemetery, and when asked what she sees there, she simply smiles and says, 'Home.' The isolation of the convent, which had once been a blessing, now became a source of mounting tension. With the roads impassable and no way to communicate with the outside world, the sisters were trapped with their fears and their dead. Dr. Hartwell had managed to return to Millbrook before the latest snowfall, but he had left behind more questions than answers. His final words to Mother Superior Brennan were recorded in a letter he wrote to his brother. "I have never encountered anything like this in my 20 years of practice. These women are dying for no reason that medical science can explain." The convent's routine continued, but everything felt different. The sisters still rose at 4 for matins, but their voices seemed quieter, more distant. They still attended to their daily tasks, but their movements were mechanical, as if they were sleepwalking through their lives. Most disturbing of all, they began to speak of death not as something to be feared, but as something to be welcomed. Sister Mary Agnes recorded conversations that filled her with growing alarm. Sister Mary Magdalene, 39 years old, and normally the most cheerful of the sisters, had begun to speak of visions she was having during prayer. "She says she sees our departed sisters in fields of golden light, and they are beckoning to her," Agnes wrote. "When I ask her to describe these visions more clearly, she becomes vague, and says only that they are too beautiful for words." The weather continued to worsen, with temperatures dropping to levels that made it dangerous to venture outside for any length of time. The sisters were effectively prisoners in their own convent, surrounded by snow and silence. The only sounds were the wind howling around the building and the occasional crack of ice-laden tree branches breaking under the weight of the accumulated snow. Mother Superior Brennan attempted to maintain order and normalcy, but even she seemed affected by the strange atmosphere that had settled over Sacred Heart. Sister Mary Agnes noted that the Mother Superior had begun to speak of God's will more frequently, and that she had started to question whether the deaths were not tragedies, but blessings. "She said to me yesterday that perhaps our sisters were chosen for a special purpose, that their deaths were not endings, but transformations," Agnes wrote. "When I asked her what she meant, she looked at me with eyes that seemed to see things I could not, and said, 'Some souls are too pure for this world, child. Perhaps God is calling them home.'" The first hint that something more than grief was affecting the convent came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Elizabeth Hoffman, a German immigrant who lived on the nearest farm, had noticed that the bell tower of Sacred Heart had been dark for several nights. Normally, the sisters would ring the bell for evening prayers, and the sound would carry across the snow-covered landscape. But for 3 nights running, there had been only silence. Mrs. Hoffman's husband Hans had attempted to check on the sisters, but the snow was too deep for his horse to make the journey. He had returned home frustrated and concerned, telling his wife that he had seen no smoke from the convent's chimneys, no signs of life at all. "It's as if the place is holding its breath," he told her, not knowing how prophetic his words would prove to be. On the morning of January 21st, 4 days after the first death, Sister Mary Margaret was discovered in the same peaceful state that had claimed her predecessors. The convent's treasurer, known for her sharp mind and practical nature, had apparently chosen to join her departed sisters in whatever realm they had found. Her account books were found neatly arranged on her small desk, with all financial records up to date, and a note in her precise handwriting: "All earthly debts settled. The final accounting awaits. Dr. Hartwell, summoned once again through the increasingly dangerous weather, arrived to find the remaining sisters gathered in the chapel. There were now 14 of them, and he was struck by the change in their appearance. Where once he had seen healthy, robust women going about their daily tasks with purpose and energy, he now observed pale, ethereal figures who seemed to be fading before his eyes. Their behavior has become increasingly strange, he wrote in his medical journal. They speak in whispers, smile at things I cannot see, and seem to be listening to voices that no one else can hear. When I ask them direct questions about their health, they respond with vague answers about feeling blessed and chosen. Most disturbing of all, they seem to welcome the deaths of their sisters as if they were celebrations rather than tragedies. The doctor's examination of Sister Mary Margaret revealed the same impossible results. A healthy woman had simply stopped living, with no medical explanation for her death. Her rosary was clutched in her hands, and her expression was one of such peace that it seemed almost unnatural. Dr. Hartwell noted that her skin was still warm to the touch, despite having been dead for several hours, and that her body showed none of the usual signs of rigor mortis. Sister Mary Agnes, still maintaining her role as the convent's recorder, documented the growing strangeness with increasing urgency. Her handwriting, normally neat and controlled, had become erratic, with letters that seemed to tremble on the page. The sisters no longer speak of worldly things, she wrote. Their conversations are all of heaven, of peace, of the joy that awaits beyond this life. They look at me with pity, as if I am the one who is suffering, as if I am the one who is lost. The isolation of the convent had become total. The snow continued to fall, and the temperature had dropped so low that the water in the kitchen buckets froze solid each night. The sisters were burning through their wood supply at an alarming rate, but they seemed unconcerned about the practical necessities of survival. Their focus had turned entirely inward, towards something that only they could see or understand. Mother Superior Brennan called for a special prayer session on the evening of January 22nd. The remaining sisters gathered in the chapel, their voices raised in hymns that seemed to echo differently in the cold air. Sister Mary Agnes noted that the singing had taken on an otherworldly quality, as if the voices were coming from somewhere beyond the physical realm. I find myself afraid to listen too closely, she wrote. There is something in their voices that calls to me, that makes me want to join them in whatever place they are going. The next morning brought the discovery that would shatter any remaining illusions about the natural causes of the deaths. Sister Mary Magdalene, the cheerful sister who had spoken of visions, was found in her bed with that same peaceful expression. But this time, there was something different. Clutched in her hand, along with her rosary, was a piece of paper with a single word written on it. Soon. Dr. Hartwell, by now deeply disturbed by the pattern of deaths, insisted on examining not just the latest victim, but the entire convent. What he found in the basement of Sacred Heart would haunt him for the rest of his life. Hidden behind a false wall in the root cellar, he discovered a small chamber that appeared to have been used for purposes unknown to the Catholic Church's approved practices. The chamber contained 13 wooden crosses, each bearing the name of a sister. 3 of the crosses, those bearing the names of Mary Catherine, Mary Elizabeth, and Mary Margaret, were lying flat on a stone altar. The remaining 10 crosses stood upright, but most disturbing of all, they were arranged in a circle around a larger cross, bearing the name of Mother Superior Catherine Brennan. I have discovered something that defies explanation, Dr. Hartwell wrote in his journal. The sisters have been preparing for their own deaths, marking them like appointments on a calendar. This is not a series of natural deaths or even a contagion. This is something far more sinister and organized. The discovery of the hidden chamber sent shockwaves through what remained of the convent community. When Dr. Hartwell confronted Mother Superior Brennan about the secret room, her response chilled him to the bone. She did not deny its existence or express surprise at its discovery. Instead, she smiled with the same peaceful expression that had been found on the faces of the dead sisters and said, "God's will cannot be hidden forever, Doctor. What must be, will be." Sister Mary Agnes, now one of only 13 surviving sisters, found herself questioning everything she had believed about her religious community. In her records, she wrote, "I no longer recognize the women I have lived with for years. They speak of death as if it were a wedding they are preparing for, as if they have received invitations to a celebration that I have not been invited to attend. When I ask them to explain what is happening, they look at me with such pity that I feel like a child who cannot understand the simplest lesson." The weather had become impossibly harsh, with temperatures dropping to 20 degrees below zero. The convent's windows were frosted over so thickly that it was impossible to see outside during the day, and at night the building creaked and groaned under the weight of ice and snow. The sisters had been forced to gather in the kitchen around the large fireplace, as it was the only room warm enough to occupy safely. But even in their cramped quarters, the remaining sisters continued their strange behavior. They prayed constantly, but their prayers had taken on an urgent quality, as if they were calling to someone who was just beyond hearing. They spoke in whispers about the time drawing near and the final calling. Most disturbing of all, they had begun to take turns sitting vigil by the window that faced the cemetery, watching for something that only they could see. Dr. Hartwell, trapped at the convent by the weather, found himself an unwilling witness to the disintegration of the community. His medical training told him that what he was observing was impossible, but his eyes could not deny the evidence before them. The sisters were dying by choice, but the mechanism of their deaths remained a mystery that defied all rational explanation. On the night of January 24th, as the wind howled around the building with such force that the walls seemed to shake, Sister Mary Agnes made a discovery that would change everything. Unable to sleep, she had been walking through the corridors of the convent when she heard voices coming from the chapel. Approaching quietly, she peered through the partially open door and saw a sight that filled her with terror. The remaining sisters were gathered around the altar, but they were not alone. In the flickering candlelight, Agnes could see figures standing among them, figures that looked exactly like the sisters who had already died. Sister Mary Catherine, Sister Mary Elizabeth and Sister Mary Margaret stood with their living companions, their faces glowing with an otherworldly light, their lips moving in silent prayer. I watched in horror as the dead sisters reached out to touch the living ones. Agnes wrote in her increasingly frantic handwriting. Where they touched, the living sisters' faces changed, becoming filled with the same peace and joy that I had seen on the faces of the dead. They were not ghosts or spirits. They were too solid, too real for that. They were something else entirely, something that my mind cannot accept or understand. As Agnes watched, paralyzed by fear and fascination, she saw Mother Superior Brennan step forward into the center of the circle. The dead sisters surrounded her, their hands reaching out to touch her face, her hands, her heart. The Mother Superior's expression changed, becoming radiant with a joy that seemed almost painful to witness. "Soon," Mother Superior Brennan whispered, her voice carrying clearly in the cold air. "Soon we will all be together, all be free from the weight of this world. The calling has come, and we must answer." The living sisters nodded in unison, their faces reflecting the same otherworldly peace that had claimed their departed companions. They began to pray in voices that harmonized perfectly with sounds that seemed to come from beyond the physical realm. The candlelight flickered and danced, casting shadows that moved independently of their sources. Sister Mary Agnes fled from the chapel, her heart pounding with terror. She ran to her cell and barricaded the door, then spent the remainder of the night writing frantically in her record book, documenting everything she had seen. Her handwriting became increasingly erratic as she struggled to capture the impossible events she had witnessed. "They are not dying," she wrote. "They are being called, chosen, transformed into something that I cannot understand. The dead sisters are not gone. They are waiting, gathering their living companions to join them in whatever realm they have discovered. And I am left behind, alone with the knowledge that I am not chosen, not worthy of whatever blessing or curse has claimed them." Just when we thought we'd seen it all, the horror in Sacred Heart intensifies. If this story is giving you chills, share this video with a friend who loves dark mysteries, hit that like button to support our content, and don't forget to subscribe to never miss stories like this. Let's discover together what happens next in this tale of death and devotion gone terribly wrong. The morning of January 25th brought the discovery that would reveal the true nature of what had been happening at Sacred Heart Convent. Sister Mary Agnes, the lone witness to the previous night's impossible gathering, found herself face to face with a truth that would shatter her understanding of reality itself. She awoke to find the convent completely silent. No morning prayers, no movement in the corridors, no sounds from the kitchen. When she emerged from her cell, she discovered that she was now entirely alone among the living. The remaining 12 sisters had all died during the night, found in their beds with the same peaceful expressions that had marked all the previous deaths. But this time, there was something different. Each sister held in her hands not just her rosary, but a piece of paper bearing a single word: complete. Dr. Hartwell, who had been sleeping in the Mother Superior's office, awoke to find Sister Mary Agnes in a state of complete shock. The young woman was sitting in the chapel, surrounded by the empty pews, staring at the altar where she had witnessed the impossible gathering the night before. When the doctor approached her, she looked up at him with eyes that seemed to have seen too much. "They're not gone," she whispered. "They're waiting. All of them, standing right there behind you, waiting for the final sister to join them." Dr. Hartwell turned to look behind him, but saw nothing except the empty chapel. When he turned back to Sister Mary Agnes, she was holding a piece of paper that had not been there moments before. On it was written a single word: soon. The doctor's medical journal from this day provides the most chilling account of what he discovered when he examined the final 12 bodies. Unlike the previous deaths, these sisters had not died alone. They had died simultaneously, at exactly the same moment, as if responding to a single, irresistible call. Their expressions were not merely peaceful, they were ecstatic, as if they had experienced a joy so profound that their mortal bodies could not contain it. "I have no medical explanation for what I have witnessed," Dr. Hartwell wrote. 13 healthy women have died without cause, without illness, without injury. They have simply chosen to depart this world, drawn by something that defies all rational explanation. The final 12 died at precisely the same moment, as if they were following a schedule that had been predetermined by forces beyond human understanding. But the most disturbing discovery was yet to come. When Dr. Hartwell and Sister Mary Agnes descended to the basement to examine the hidden chamber more closely, they found that the arrangement of crosses had changed. The 12 crosses bearing the names of the newly dead sisters were now lying flat on the altar, joined by the cross bearing Mother Superior Brennan's name. Only one cross remained standing, the one bearing the name of Mary Agnes. The ritual was not complete, Dr. Hartwell realized with growing horror. They were waiting for the final sister to join them. The deaths were not random. They were carefully orchestrated, building toward a moment when the entire community would be united in whatever realm they had chosen to inhabit. Sister Mary Agnes, confronted with the evidence of her own predetermined fate, began to speak in a voice that seemed to come from somewhere beyond her own mind. "They call to me constantly now," she said. "Their voices are so beautiful, so full of peace and joy. They tell me that I am the last, the completion of their sacred circle. They say that once I join them, their work will be finished, their purpose fulfilled." The doctor, driven by desperation and a growing sense that he was witnessing something that should not exist in the rational world, began to search frantically through the convent's records. In Mother Superior Brennan's private papers, he found a journal that revealed the truth behind the deaths. A truth so disturbing that it would haunt him for the rest of his life. The journal detailed a correspondence that had been taking place between Mother Superior Brennan and a mysterious figure known only as the Shepherd. The letters, written in a code that took Dr. Hartwell hours to decipher, revealed that the deaths at Sacred Heart were not spontaneous religious experiences, but the culmination of a carefully planned ritual that had been in preparation for months. The Shepherd had convinced Mother Superior Brennan that the Sisters of Sacred Heart had been chosen for a special purpose, to serve as a bridge between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. The ritual required the willing sacrifice of 13 sisters, each dying at precisely the right moment to create a spiritual gateway that would allow the dead to return and gather their living companions. But as Dr. Hartwell delved deeper into the correspondence, he discovered something even more terrifying. The letters contained detailed instructions on how to prepare the sisters psychologically for their deaths, using a combination of religious fervor, isolation, and carefully crafted suggestions that would make them believe they were receiving divine visions. The peaceful expressions on their faces were not the result of spiritual ecstasy, but of a systematic program of mental conditioning that had convinced them that death was a glorious transformation. The most chilling revelation was that the ritual was not unique to Sacred Heart. The shepherd had been in correspondence with religious communities across the country, orchestrating similar events wherever he could find leaders willing to believe in his divine mission. The deaths at Sacred Heart were just one part of a much larger plan that had been unfolding for years. As Dr. Hartwell read through page after page of detailed instructions on psychological manipulation and religious conditioning, he began to understand the full scope of what had happened. The sisters had not been victims of supernatural forces. They had been victims of a calculated campaign of mental abuse disguised as spiritual guidance. Their faith, their isolation, and their trust in their Mother Superior had been weaponized against them by someone who understood exactly how to exploit religious devotion for his own twisted purposes. The entire tragedy could have been prevented, Dr. Hartwell wrote in his journal. These women died not because of divine calling or supernatural intervention, but because they were systematically conditioned to believe that their deaths would serve a holy purpose. They were murdered not with poison or violence, but with lies carefully crafted to appeal to their deepest spiritual longings. The doctor's hands trembled as he read the final letters in the correspondence. The shepherd had been planning to visit Sacred Heart in the spring to witness the completion of his experiment. He had viewed the sisters not as human beings with inherent worth and dignity, but as test subjects in a grand design to prove his theories about the power of faith to overcome the natural human instinct for self-preservation. He was creating a methodology, Dr. Hartwell realized with growing horror, a systematic approach to convincing religious communities to commit mass suicide while believing they were serving God. The Sisters of Sacred Heart were not his first victims, and they were not intended to be his last. The final entry in Sister Mary Agnes's record book, written in a hand that trembled with either fear or anticipation, reveals the ultimate truth behind the deaths at Sacred Heart Convent. As Dr. Hartwell worked frantically to decode the Mother Superior's correspondence, Agnes sat alone in the chapel, surrounded by the presence of her departed sisters. "They are all here with me now," she wrote. "I can see them as clearly as I could see them in life, perhaps more clearly. They stand in a circle around me, their faces glowing with a light that comes from within, their voices joining in a harmony that makes my heart ache with longing. They tell me that the door between worlds is almost open, that one more willing soul is needed to complete the bridge they have built with their deaths." Dr. Hartwell, having finally deciphered the complete correspondence, realized that the shepherd was not a religious figure at all, but a man named Marcus Aldrich, a former seminary student who had been expelled from theological school for his heretical beliefs about death and resurrection. Aldrich had become obsessed with the idea that death was not an ending, but a transformation, and that properly prepared souls could return to guide others across the threshold between life and death. The doctor's journal records his growing understanding of the horrific truth. Aldrich has been using the isolation and devotion of religious communities to conduct experiments in what he calls spiritual engineering. He identifies communities that are particularly devout and isolated, then uses their faith against them, convincing them that they have been chosen for a special purpose. The deaths are not suicides in the traditional sense. They are acts of faith, performed by people who genuinely believe they are serving a divine purpose. But Dr. Hartwell's investigation revealed something even more disturbing about Aldrich's methods. The man had not simply convinced the sisters to die, he had created an elaborate psychological conditioning program that made them want to die. Through a careful combination of religious imagery, social isolation, and repeated suggestions, he had convinced them that their earthly lives were obstacles to a greater spiritual existence. The letters showed how Aldrich had instructed Mother Superior Brennan to gradually introduce ideas about the chosen ones who would be called to serve God in a special way. He had provided her with specific prayers and meditations designed to make the sisters more susceptible to suggestion, and he had given her detailed instructions on how to interpret any unusual events as signs of divine favor. Most insidiously, Aldrich had taught the Mother Superior to use the sisters' love for each other as a weapon against them. Each death was presented not as a tragedy, but as a blessing that the remaining sisters should envy. The peaceful expressions on the faces of the dead were used as proof that they had found something wonderful beyond life, making the living sisters eager to follow them. He turned their greatest strength, their love for God and each other, into the instrument of their destruction. Dr. Hartwell wrote, "These women died believing they were being obedient to divine will, when in fact they were being obedient to the twisted fantasies of a madman who saw their faith as something to be exploited rather than respected." As the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, Dr. Hartwell realized that he had to act quickly to save Sister Mary Agnes from the fate that had claimed her companions. But when he returned to the chapel to warn her, he found her kneeling before the altar, her arms outstretched as if embracing invisible figures. "Doctor," she said without turning around, "they have shown me such beautiful things. They have shown me the place where pain ends and joy begins, where the weight of this world falls away like old clothes. How can I turn away from such a gift?" Doctor Hartwell tried to explain what he had discovered, tried to convince her that the deaths were not divine callings, but the result of psychological manipulation by a disturbed individual. He read to her from Aldrich's letters, showing her the detailed instructions for conditioning religious communities to accept death as a blessing. He explained how her visions and the peaceful expressions of her dead sisters were not supernatural phenomena, but the predictable results of a carefully orchestrated campaign of mental manipulation. But Sister Mary Agnes only smiled with the same peaceful expression that had marked all the previous deaths. "You see only the surface of things," she said. "You see death where there is transformation. You see loss where there is gain. My sisters are not gone. They are more alive than they have ever been. And soon, I will join them in that greater life." Dr. Hartwell, driven by desperation, attempted to physically remove Sister Mary Agnes from the chapel. But as he reached for her, she spoke a single word: "Now." The young nun's body went limp, and she collapsed into Dr. Hartwell's arms. Her expression was one of profound peace, her lips curved in a gentle smile. Like all the sisters who had died before her, she showed no signs of illness or injury. She had simply chosen to stop living, drawn by a call that only she could hear. A call that had been carefully programmed into her mind by someone who understood exactly how to exploit religious faith for his own purposes. Dr. Hartwell, now the sole survivor of the tragedy at Sacred Heart Convent, spent the next 3 days alone in the building, caring for the bodies of 14 women who had died for reasons that were both perfectly explainable and completely horrifying. When the weather finally cleared enough for him to make the journey back to Millbrook, he was a changed man, who carried with him the terrible knowledge of how easily faith could be corrupted by those who sought to exploit it. His final report to the county authorities was a masterpiece of medical discretion. He attributed the deaths to a previously unknown contagion that had been contained by the isolation of the convent. The bodies were buried in a mass grave in the cemetery behind Sacred Heart, and the building was sealed by order of the Catholic Church. But Dr. Hartwell's private journals, discovered after his death in 1867, tell a different story entirely. In them, he documents not just the events at Sacred Heart, but his subsequent investigation into similar occurrences at religious communities across the country. What he found was a pattern of tragedies that stretched back nearly a decade, all connected by the same mysterious correspondence with the shepherd. A convent in Virginia where 8 nuns died in their sleep, all found with peaceful expressions and notes reading, "Called home." A monastery in Pennsylvania where 12 monks were found dead in their chapel after what the surviving brother described as a night of divine visitation. A Baptist mission in Tennessee where an entire congregation of 23 people passed away during a prayer meeting, their faces showing the same inexplicable joy that had marked the Sisters of Sacred Heart. All of these deaths had been attributed to various natural causes: disease, accidents, acts of God. Local authorities, lacking the medical knowledge to explain the phenomena, had accepted the explanations provided by surviving religious leaders or visiting physicians. But Dr. Hartwell's research revealed the common thread that connected them all: correspondence with Marcus Aldrich, the self-styled shepherd who had perfected the art of turning faith into a weapon of mass destruction. Dr. Hartwell's investigation led him to some of Aldrich's early writings, published in obscure theological journals under various pseudonyms. In these papers, Aldrich outlined his theories about the spiritual engineering of religious communities, arguing that true faith required the complete surrender of earthly attachment, including attachment to life itself. He believed that properly guided religious communities could achieve a state of collective transcendence that would serve as an example to the wider world. Aldrich saw himself as a prophet of a new form of religious expression, Dr. Hartwell wrote. He believed that he was helping these communities achieve their ultimate spiritual potential, even as he was systematically destroying them. In his mind, the deaths were not tragedies but triumphs, proof that his methods could overcome the most basic human instinct for survival. The doctor's research also revealed that Aldrich had not worked alone. He had developed a network of followers who helped him identify suitable communities and provided him with detailed information about their religious practices, leadership structures, and vulnerabilities. These accomplices, often former seminary students or disillusioned clergy members, would infiltrate communities months or even years before Aldrich made contact, gradually preparing the ground for his psychological manipulation. Most disturbing of all, Dr. Hartwell discovered that the events at Sacred Heart were not the end of Aldrich's campaign, but merely one experiment in a much larger program. The doctor found evidence that Aldrich had been working on refining his methods, developing more efficient ways to condition entire communities for mass death while maintaining the appearance of natural or divine causation. He was not content with isolated successes, Dr. Hartwell wrote. He was building towards something much larger, a demonstration that would involve hundreds or even thousands of people. The Sisters of Sacred Heart were test subjects in a laboratory of faith, their deaths serving as data points in a grand experiment that defied every principle of human decency. Aldrich himself proved to be remarkably elusive. Dr. Hartwell's attempts to track him down led to a series of false identities and abandoned residences scattered across the eastern United States. The man seemed to have an uncanny ability to disappear just as authorities were closing in, leaving behind only his letters and the communities he had destroyed. The closest, Dr. Hartwell came to finding Aldrich was in the summer of 1835 when he traced the man to a small town in western Pennsylvania. But when he arrived, he found that Aldrich had vanished 3 days earlier, leaving behind a rented room containing only a single piece of paper with the words, "The work continues," written in the same precise handwriting that had filled the letters to Mother Superior Brennan. Some believed that Aldrich had realized the authorities were pursuing him and had fled to avoid prosecution. Others suspected that he had eventually joined one of the communities he had manipulated, dying alongside the people he had convinced to sacrifice themselves for his twisted vision of spiritual transcendence. But Dr. Hartwell came to believe that Aldrich had simply moved on to new hunting grounds, perhaps taking his methods to the expanding frontier, where isolated religious communities were even more vulnerable to his manipulation. The most terrifying aspect of this entire tragedy, Dr. Hartwell concluded in his final journal entry about the case, is not that one madman was able to convince so many people to die for his delusions. It is that his methods were so effective, so perfectly calibrated to exploit the deepest human longings for meaning and transcendence, that they could be replicated by anyone with sufficient knowledge of human psychology and religious devotion. The Sacred Heart Convent stood empty for nearly 40 years before being demolished in 1873. The land was sold to a farming family named Johnson, who reported nothing unusual about the property except for the fact that their livestock refused to graze in the area where the convent had stood. The animals would approach to within 50 yards of the former building site, then turn away as if sensing something that humans could not detect. The cemetery remains to this day, though the wooden crosses that once marked the graves have long since rotted away, leaving only slight depressions in the earth to indicate where the sisters lie buried. Local residents have reported strange phenomena over the years. lights moving among the graves on winter nights, the sound of women's voices singing hymns in a language that no one can identify, and an inexplicable sense of sadness that settles over visitors to the site. Whether these reports reflect genuine supernatural activity or simply the power of suggestion working on people who know the tragic history of the place is impossible to determine. What is certain is that the story of Sacred Heart serves as a powerful reminder of how easily faith can be corrupted by those who understand its power and are willing to exploit it for their own purposes. The case files that Dr. Hartwell compiled during his investigation were donated to the Ohio Historical Society after his death, where they remained largely ignored until the 1920s. It was only when similar mass deaths began occurring in other parts of the country, the Jonestown Massacre, the Heaven's Gate suicides, the Branch Davidian tragedy, that researchers began to recognize the patterns that Dr. Hartwell had identified nearly a century earlier. Modern psychologists who have studied Dr. Hartwell's records describe Aldrich's methods as a nearly perfect example of what is now known as coercive persuasion or thought reform. By combining isolation, repetitive indoctrination, and the gradual erosion of critical thinking skills, he was able to convince his victims that their own deaths were not only acceptable but desirable. What makes the Sacred Heart case so particularly disturbing, noted Dr. Margaret Chen, a specialist in cult psychology who studied the case in the 1990s, is the precision with which Aldrich was able to manipulate the religious convictions of his victims. He didn't attack their faith. He weaponized it, turning their most sacred beliefs into the instruments of their own destruction. This mystery shows us how faith, when twisted by those who would exploit it, can become a weapon capable of destroying even the most devoted souls. The Sisters of Sacred Heart were not evil women who deserved their fate. They were faithful, loving people who were manipulated by someone who understood their devotion and used it against them. Their deaths serve as a reminder that even the most sacred beliefs can be corrupted by those who seek power over others, and that true vigilance requires not just faith, but the wisdom to recognize when that faith is being exploited. The tragedy also demonstrates the importance of community connections and oversight in religious life. The isolation that the sisters had viewed as a blessing became the very factor that made them vulnerable to Aldrich's manipulation. Had they maintained stronger ties to the outside world, had there been regular visits from church authorities who were not under Aldrich's influence, the conditioning process that led to their deaths might have been interrupted before it reached its terrible conclusion. Perhaps most importantly, the story of Sacred Heart reminds us that evil often wears the mask of righteousness, and that the most dangerous predators are often those who cloak their intentions in the language of spiritual enlightenment. The sisters died believing they were serving God, when in fact they were serving the twisted ambitions of a man who saw their faith as something to be exploited rather than honored. What do you think of this story? Do you believe that the deaths at Sacred Heart were truly the result of psychological manipulation? Or was there something more supernatural at work? Were the sisters victims of a madman's delusion? Or did they genuinely discover something beyond the veil of death that called to them? Could such systematic manipulation of religious faith happen again in our modern world? Or have we learned enough from tragedies like this to prevent their recurrence? Leave your comment below and share your thoughts on this chilling tale of faith corrupted and innocence destroyed. If you enjoyed this tale and want more horror stories like this, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share with someone who loves mysteries. There are more dark secrets waiting to be uncovered in America's religious history, stories of faith tested and innocence lost that few dare to tell. If you're brave enough to face them, we'll explore them together, one terrifying truth at a time. See you in the next video, where we'll delve into another chapter of America's hidden religious mysteries.